Hey, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Thanks, Squarespace. Yay. Hey, wow. Hi. How's it going? My name is Thomas Brush. I'm the creator of a game called Pinstripe, also a game called Neversong, which we'll be releasing soon. Those games are on pretty much every platform you can think of, so if you guys want to check them out, click the link in the description. That would really mean a lot to me. So in all of this craziness with this virus that I can't say on YouTube, the market is kind of tumbling a little bit, at least in the United States. I don't know how it's doing across the world. The whole concept of money is a scary one. We don't really know what anything is going to look like in the future. But what I can say is indie game development, I can imagine, is pretty much kind of safe because we're all going to play video games while we quarantine ourselves. So the video game industry, I can imagine, is totally fine. Anything digital, you can't spread a virus with something digital. So I think the indie game industry will be okay. It'll be okay. I don't know exactly what it will be, but I think it'll be okay. But I got this email basically about indie game funding. And so I'm gonna tell you guys, in my experience, what indie game funding looks like. Where does the money come from? How much money is it? And maybe break down a couple misconceptions about funding for the indie game industry. So let's take a look. Okay guys, before we get started, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Believe it or not, I've been wanting Squarespace as a sponsor for so long, mainly because Squarespace is awesome. I've been using Squarespace for, I think, 6 years. Both my websites, thomasbrush.com and atmosgames.com, where I host my games and my portfolio, my resume, all that cool stuff is hosted on Squarespace. It was created with Squarespace. Squarespace is cool because you can look amazing, you can have custom designs and pretty much do anything you need to do for your business or your own personal brand, all with Squarespace, and you don't have to know how to code. So if you guys are interested in creating a website with Squarespace, click the link below, squarespace.com/ThomasBrush, and use the promo code ThomasBrush for 10% off. Yay, I love Squarespace, I really do. Thanks, Squarespace. So the email is from this wonderful dude named John, and he says, "Dear Thomas, hope you and Atmos Games are well, blah, 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 blah." A couple general questions. His question is regarding video game financing. Were you able to fund Pinstripe yourself, or did you require a publisher to fund it? Well, that's a great question, and his email continues, but I'm going to answer that really quick. Pinstripe was funded by a community and by a publisher. And that might sound excessive, but it's not. When you get funding at the start of your game, whether it's from Kickstarter or some other fundraising platform, you feel amazing, right? You make like $100,000 and you think, this is all I need to make my game. But in reality, it always ends up being a little bit more expensive to make your game. I can't really remember how much total Pinstripe cost. I know it took 5 years to make that game. The Neversong Kickstarter campaign, which that was actually originally called Once Upon a Coma, that raised around $80,000, $86,000 I think total. That game cost way more than $86,000 to make. It was not just funded by Kickstarter. And that might be upsetting to you guys, and it might scare you a little bit. It definitely would have scared me 5 years ago, or was it, I think 4 years ago when I did my first Kickstarter campaign. It would have scared me because I'm like, oh my goodness, I need more than what I raised on Kickstarter. But the truth is that if you just keep working and keep taking baby steps towards your goal, you'll find that the money kind of flows in, and you almost don't even realize how much money you're spending on your project. And it kind of just works itself out. I know that that's probably not really encouraging, is it? You'll figure it out. It's hard to explain. Once you get into something like that, like funding your indie game, it becomes second nature to be always looking for funding. And so I guess answering your question, John, it wasn't only funded by Kickstarter. Pinstripe was not only funded by Kickstarter, it was also funded by a publisher who provided an advance. I can't say how much the advance was, but it was less, I believe, it was less than the Kickstarter campaign's funding itself. And you'll find that that's true for a lot of indie games. They'll do a Kickstarter campaign, but they also will be able to achieve some sort of advance or a lump sum payment from a publisher in exchange for like 30% of the revenue of the game. John continues, I know many successful indie games were actually made by one person, such as Minecraft, Stardew Valley, and Braid. I'm going to answer this. It's not really a question, but it's a statement. I've been given advice by people in the past. They've said, Thomas, you should self-publish your game. It was done with Minecraft, or it was done by Jonathan Blow, who made Braid, or Edmund McMillan, and he made Super Meat Boy. They always give these examples of why you should self-publish your game based on these one-off instances of people who did it. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't self-publish your game, but what I am saying is it's kind of like saying someone won $1 million, so you should go buy a lottery ticket. It's kind of like that, because the truth is that there are plenty of game developers who are very successful, who have publishers, and I like to think I'm one of those people. I like to work with publishers. The reason I like it is because they provide funding up front, and they also can my favorite thing about a publisher is they act as kind of an agent, meaning they find opportunities for you while you can focus on what you're good at. What I'm good at is writing music and doing atmosphere and telling stories, right? I don't really want to focus on looking for opportunities as well. So that's a quick statement about these few games that are self-published. So you said that many successful indie games were made by one person, Minecraft, Stardew Valley, and Braid. Did you make Pinstripe by yourself, or did it require paying a development team? So this is a weird thing. Pinstripe, yes, was made completely alone. I ended up, for the port of Xbox and PS4, I ended up paying someone to port it. But when it comes to the Steam version, that was completely made alone. Now, when it comes to Neversong, my game that's about to release on pretty much every platform, that game was done by me and also Serenity Forge, which is my publisher. But publisher isn't really a good word, because nowadays things are a little bit different with indie games, because you could partner up in very interesting ways, because everyone can work remote, and with Slack or Discord and all of these different systems online, you can collaborate in ways you couldn't maybe 10 years ago. So Serenity Forge is my publisher, but they kind of act as my agent and also like a development team. They offered up a few developers to help with the game, so I can do what I do best, and they can help do the code and the development. John finally concludes with a final question, which is, if an indie game developer is seeking investment capital, where should he or she go to obtain this funding? I've definitely answered this question a lot on my channel, but I guess it definitely bears repeating. It comes from all over the place. And as an indie game developer, we all need to be okay with the idea of money coming from all different directions. A lot of you have watched YouTube videos from indie game developers who say, how much did my game make? And they tell you how many game sales they sold on Steam. This is, it's kind of it's not the full picture of how indie game developers make money. Not in the slightest. Now, maybe it's just me, but my funding comes from all over the place. And I remember I bought a whiteboard 2 years ago and hung it up in my office just so I could write out where my funding comes from in like a pie chart, so that I didn't go crazy, because it was coming from all over the place. But I can break it down for you really quickly here. I can't give you exact numbers. I'm sorry. Based on NDAs and contracts and all that, I can't give you the exact numbers. The majority comes from a company in California. That's all. It's a publisher in California. The majority comes from licensing agreements. licensing my games so that they can sell them. So the majority comes from that. Another chunk of a good chunk of change comes from Nintendo Switch and Steam. So game sales from Nintendo Switch and Steam. Another good chunk of funding comes from publishers. So publishers across the United States who have worked with me in the past, and royalty payments. So that's kind of mixed with the Nintendo Switch and Steam sales. It's royalty payments, but also advance payments, like lump sum payments where they say, hey, we want 30 to 40% of your game sales. Here's a big chunk of cash. Well, I guess it's relative to what's big to you, but here's a chunk of cash. And then a little piece, it's kind of a bigger piece, comes from like crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, pre-order sales, those kinds of things. And then another chunk of cash comes from YouTube revenue from these kind of videos. So ad revenue, sponsorships for videos, which isn't really game sales, but it kind of is because my studio is kind of interconnected with YouTube. So you basically were asking, John, about venture capital. I don't do that. But getting investment from companies or from publishers to license your product, which is basically investment, right? That happens often as well. So as you can see, like there's a lot of money coming from all over the place. And there's also Patreon. Money comes in from Patreon as well. So it's kind of hard to balance it all, right? It's not just game sales. If that's your entire paradigm is just game sales, if you get lucky, you're going to be fine. Or if you're really talented and you have an awesome game, you're going to be fine. Like Stardew Valley, obviously their funding comes from, or their revenue comes from a lot of different sources, but I'm sure the primary is just from game sales. For the majority of game developers, they're going to need to learn how to sniff out funding all over the place. You need to learn to always be looking for funding from a variety of different sources. So John, that's as best as I can answer your question. I hope I did a good job. Guys, if you like this video, please leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. And ultimately, guys, just take this advice, give it a shot, and see what happens. Bye, guys.